Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi.
All right. You can probably go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the weekly SDK call. Got a few things on the agenda today. Most of them pertain to V3 stuff that we didn't get to last week. And just a couple other things I wanted to go over really quick. First thing I wanted to talk about real quick is demos. So we're gonna start. Well, these Hashgraph employees have been doing demo days for a while now, but we're gonna try moving them into these meetings. So basically, just a opportunity for developers or anyone working on that SDK projects to demo what they're working on, whether it's a new feature, um, new capability, new anything that they deem worthy is of showing off. So I didn't ask for any this week, but mostly just wanted to let everyone know we're gonna start doing that here, and as well as if anyone wants to do a demo, they can reach out to me either on Slack or Discord or wherever, and we can get that on the agenda. Um, so yeah, so we're gonna start doing that going forward. Again, we didn't ask for any today, but just wanted everyone to know that. Um, yeah. So second thing, we Hendrik and I were talking a bit last week about basically trying to get all the SDKs a bit more, I guess, open and more more ready for new contributors to come in and be able to work on those SDKs, kind of like how they came in and started doing work so easily for the Python SDK. So we were talking with Jessica about doing a good first issue weekly meeting. So this is basically going to be a meeting where we can go through all of the SDKs. It'll kind of act like a backlog grooming in a way. So we're basically just going to go through and look at the issues there, make sure that their descriptions are good, they're properly labeled, and really go ahead and discern what the good first issues are and label them as such. Um, Hendrik, I can't remember for sure. I was looking on on my calendar and I thought we had established the meeting and picked it,
Yes, but
but
let me check. We have
it's not on my
Jessica
calendar.
already changed it directly, and I think it's starting next week. Give me a second. Um,
Just saying, I think I've attended some of those in the past. Is this like a different one or is it the same?
yeah, so the idea is quite similar to the one we had, Sophie. But now we want to say we limit it on the SDKs because coming from the Hacktoberfest, one of the learning is we have a lot of projects. Some work good, some work not so good. And we learned a lot, and we want to do it now step by step. And the ones that are the easiest ones are the SDKs, especially since we have one SDK that performed fantastically, and a lot of other SDKs that could easily do similar stuff and learn from exactly that. And that's why we said we will concentrate on the SDKs. And I'm just seeing the meeting is on Tuesdays. So it's tomorrow is the first meeting. It's directly before the TSC meeting. So it's a weekly meeting that is that is now every week before the TSC. The hour before the TSC is the good first issue refinement meeting for Hiero SDKs. And if that is not working at all for a lot of people, then for sure we can change it because here I think it's really important that SDK maintainers from the different SDKs and committers are part on that meeting, working together to create very good first issues and maybe level two issues or however we want to call them for all the SDKs.
Yeah, I think in that meeting too, we can kind of maybe define the guidelines a bit more of what we how we want to do like a good first issue, and then if we want to call it a level two issue or level three, we can kind of define that a bit more as well. But yeah, so yeah, the first meeting is tomorrow. So it is on the LFDT calendar, so everyone should be able to go in and register and be added to that. Um, yeah. So any other questions with that? Cool, cool. Um, so all right. So we've been talking a lot about V3. I know last meeting we spent a lot of time going over keys. There were a few other topics we wanted to get to, but the key discussion went a little long, so I thought it would be good maybe to go over those topics we missed first, and then we can circle back around to keys at the end if we are able to get through these.
Yeah.
Let's see. I see Venlin's on the call. So Venlin, I know you and Vanko have been looking at V3 a little bit, and you had some topics you wanted to talk about. I don't think Vanko mentioned specifically what they were, but maybe just something around the design, or if you had any concerns. Yeah, just go ahead and kind of give you the floor here.
Yes, actually, we had some concerns about if we should plan the deprecation plan ahead, but it turned out after I've researched it, makes sense that we first define the APIs and then after the APIs for the V3 are well defined and concrete, and then we will probably need to have a proper deprecation plan for the so we make the changes so the users of the SDK is informed that this API will be deprecated and this will be the new API, and this has to be planned, I guess, 6 months ahead for a good semantic versioning practice. But yeah, that's probably not. It's not the time right now to discuss this.
Yeah, so real quick before I get to Hendrik. Yeah, so we're still kind of in the process of coming up with kind of like just like a V3 like POC. So we're just kind of just messing around with what we think a V3 could look like. Do a quick POC of it, and then I think kind of what we talked about was taking that to the TSC and seeing how they wanted to proceed. Um, if that's something we wanted to pursue sooner rather than later, or if they thought it wasn't going to be an immediate need. But we were going to get their input on that as well. At least that's how I understood it. Hendrik?
Yeah. So totally understand the concerns here. And so Richard started some time ago a guideline regarding how to handle breaking changes and so on in Hiero. And I had a meeting with him last week, and I will now take it over. So I have it on my list for this week, in best case, to create a full PR regarding rules of deprecation, of how to handle, breaking APIs, and so on and so on. And in general, we should then live and work based on exactly those guidelines. But I think V3 is a little bit different because what we are seeing today is that the SDKs at some points based on architecture decisions that have been done some years ago, it's complicated to move forward. It's complicated to create a very good developer experience with the growing SDKs, and moving that into another direction will need breaking changes. So we will have breaking changes in the SDKs. And here our idea is, instead of doing again and again and again breaking changes, now go back, see how would, from our today's perspective, a perfect SDK look like, try to define it, and then bring that, as Rob said, to the TSC, and make sure that is a V3 that is incompatible from a public API point of view from V2. And I assume that even means that there will be a period where we will move V3 forward, but even fixing things in V2, which is horrible. I totally agree on it. And I know, because I did things like that already. I know that it's horrible and I hate it. But I assume that is one thing that end of next year, whenever we will do that, will happen. Currently, the idea is with V3, as Rob said, to create proof of concepts, to think about the SDKs and use like all the next months to like sharpen, the X before we come with a real V3. Yeah. And I'm happy to show how we currently work. I'm more than happy to get way more feedback than I'm getting today, which is mostly coming from Rob, which is good feedback. But I really would like to include the community in total from other companies like LimeChain, or individuals like Sophie or Angelina being here at the call as an example, in the thoughts on how V3 could look like, how the API could look like, and so on. And even happy to, like do meetings for that, discuss all the topics, and move that forward.
So is there another call where V3 is discussed to the community?
No, so currently it's discussed in that call. We had a keys, so not keys cover, a public and private keys bottleneck. To make it clear that it's not keys being here in the meeting. I always say it when talking about keys, because for me, I spell both exactly the same. That didn't allow us to have a deeper look into all the other things that are happening, how we work. And I'm totally happy to show all that here, to share it. And if we see that it needs more time, I'm happy to create a second meeting, especially for V3 discussions, prototyping, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've just been here in the community calls, learning a little bit about keys and all kinds of things. It just sounds like there's been more conversations that yeah. I'm just curious, like, what was the need for the V3? What's the process for it? What's kind of time scale and things. But
Yeah. So
no, probably wouldn't be the best person to attend those meetings. I'm just just listening in, really.
I think having user is very important because somehow it need to be done in the Python SDK too. It need to fit to the Python SDK. You come there with a fresh mind, which is very good too. So I would really like to have people like you on the meetings. And even if you are, like not participating in writing the documentation or guidelines that we currently define for V3, discussing about all that here in the meetings and learning about it, I think that's a huge benefit. And it fits into the SDK scope. So the question is, does it fit all in one meeting or do we need to split it? That's because if we see like regarding the keys discussion, that takes several hours to continue, and I assume it could. Then we only discuss about keys, and V3 is moving forward on other topics, and people get missed about it. That is definitely not what I want. On the other hand, I don't want to, just cut the keys topic because I think it's important, and I like how much we discuss here because that is exactly what I would like to see for every part of V3. So I think we just need to learn how to move forward here in the best way. What we could do is, Rob, maybe we have a look at how is V3 currently defined and how is the work going forward on it? What do you think about that?
Yeah, you mean just kind of go through what we have like right now?
Yeah, what we have. I mean, I assume a lot of people have no idea where to find those information, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was gonna suggest maybe even for like next week, like I could prepare just like a 5-10 minute like, quickly go through it and also kind of define, uh timelines, like exactly. So I know eventually like Keith had some questions about deprecation timeline as well. But I think there's just been like some kind of miscommunication or confusion about exactly like where we're at and what we're doing. So I think was thinking, yeah, just do like a quick like 10-minute thing, just to kind of go over all that and make sure we're all on the same page. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, if we can go through kind of the guidelines and stuff we have now. Um, Real quick. So in the SDK hub, we have our V3 sandbox folder, which is where we have the API guidelines as well as the actual like prototype code. And that's in the prototype folder here.
I think here it's important to say, so what is under V3 Sandbox prototype is where I started with, and based on the tests and things we did here, the API documentation that is in exactly that folder has been created, and it do not fit exactly anymore, right? So because based on discussions, we changed things, and currently those are changed here in the markdown file. So it's not that the Java code fits 100% to it. It was more like I created the Java code for 100% to execute one transaction on how I believe a V3 could look like so that we had a good base. And then we used that base to start the discussions and did deep dive into API parts and did documentations about how we would see a V3 API exactly here in those files. So this, what Rob is now sharing, is the most important part from my point of view.
Yeah, so this is kind of what we've been working on, or well, Hendrik's been working on. I've just kind of been reviewing and offering input. These markdown files here. So each of these markdown files kind of defines a different API. So for this one, for example, is the client API. And actually, I should say, we have a, let's see, is that in here? Yeah.
Yep.
So this API guideline doc here kind of defines a language agnostic syntax that we use in uh, our markdown file, like our prototype markdown files here that defines the API. So I mean, it's pretty simple. Like you could probably just look at the files itself and kind of get a good idea of what, you know, uh, what everything is and kind of get an idea of the structure there, but it kind of just defines it out a little bit more. So defines like what the types look like, uh, any sort of special behavior. You know, we have different annotations for that. Like, you know, like a lot of the proto buffs, there's like a one of one where it's like one of, you know, potentially two or three or however many different values. So, you know, define that here, what that looks like. Abstractions, you know, templated types, all that stuff. It's all here. So, um, this is kind of the language and the guidelines we use in these files here that actually define the APIs we have. Um, so as you can see, we've already done a good amount of work here defining, you know, what the client looks like, operator account. You know, we still have some unanswered questions and just comments in some of these files. But yeah, I mean it's all here kind of what we're looking at the moment. So maybe people can go through and take a look at these on their own time maybe. But yeah, like Hendrik said, this is where the definitions are being made and is more representative of where we're at currently as opposed to the actual code in
And I think it's important to say that it's a moving target, right? So meaning that what do we have now here, the transactions MD, having that file with content don't mean that we're done defining the transactions API. That is the current state. And whenever you have questions, whenever you think something should be different, all that information is more than welcome because all of that is a moving target.
Mhm.
I think that is very important here. And even if we decide, okay, that all makes no sense, we need to do it in a complete different way, that is totally fine. And currently we do exactly that for keys, right? So we have, if you can open it already, a keys MD. And while we discussed those information here, we figured out that we have a lot of problems and a lot of unanswered questions. And here we have like questions and comments, a huge section. And I already created a pull request that changes the API in a heavy way that is currently open based on the last two SDK community meetings that we had and the presentation that Rob gave last week. So I took all that, I did some additional research and tried to update the API here based on that information. And even this is not done, right? That is maybe now the next iteration, a new thing that we can use as a baseline for discussion and so on. And I'm happy to go a lot of rounds discussing all that things and moving it, forward step by step and changing things until we all agree that we have here a version that really makes sense. Is there a documentation for version 2 other than the protobuf? Is a question in the chat. I would say the Hedera docs and the protobuf. That's the documentation. Or what? Is there anything else?
No, there was an old repo that I think tried to act like V2 documentation, but it was just never updated. It fell way behind, and I think at some point we just decided that the actual Hedera doc or Hiero docs now themselves would be that. Um, but I still think that in the back of my head, I still think that'd be something like good to try and keep up with if we can. Just something like this. We have this API guideline defined. In my mind, it's like why not try and keep like documentation for like even if we go through this process, get V3 approved and good to go and released still have something somewhere that defines exactly what V3 looks like. So, for example, if, someone wanted to develop I don't know, like a Ruby SDK or something, like they could just go in there, they have all the APIs defined, they know exactly what to do. Everything is laid out for them. So yeah, we don't have anything like that now for V2, but I would like to try and have something like that going forward. But again, I also understand it's kind of annoying to try and keep that updated.
But on the other hand, since we now have this API guideline, so my wish is to, in upcoming proposals, even for V2 or independent, like proposals that are created in the future for the SDKs, from my point of view, should use this guidelines to do a specification. And if you go on the left to the file above, which is the API best practices Java, that is one where I started, where I collect information. Okay, how can you take proposals that are written in this API guideline meta language and do a concrete implementation in Java um, based on the information you have? And my wish is to have in future for every programming language we have an SDK for a file like that shows best practices and pattern that should be used when implementing new functionality within the SDKs. And coming to a question that Keith asked some weeks ago, what I'm currently trying is quite interesting. I'm taking the documentation of the V3 prototype API. I'm taking the API guidelines and this best practice Java project and say the AI, hey, please do a full implementation. And whenever I see the API don't understand something concretely, do something wrong, something is missing, I'm trying to bring this into any of those documents so that in future this can maybe even help us for AI reviews, for using AI as a tool to move forward with new implementations and so on.
Are there any like timelines for V3? Is that like a current priority of like Hashgraph? Is that something that started to think about recently?
Mm, Robert, do we have any concrete milestones with a date, or is it more like in next year we want to have a POC?
That's all we have right now. Is just develop a POC by next year or the end of next year. Which again, like you could change if we develop a POC, take it to TSC, and they're like, yes, we need to do this right now. Then become more of a priority then, and that's when we would need to figure out getting back to Veneland's concern, figure out like deprecation timelines and figuring out how we're gonna dual support like a V3 and a V2 for however long we want to do that. Um, but yeah, and until we kind of go to the TSC with this, it's kind of more on a just, work on it on the side, when you can, and just try and yeah, just like define it a little bit more.
Yeah. So my personal point of view here is, or my wish would be to say like end of Q1, so end of March, having this prototype API with all the markdowns done in a way that we say, hey, that would be a very good definition of an SDK, of an V3 SDK for, and now it gets interesting, for consensus node. Because today we have no good integration for mirror node, and with block nodes coming in next year, we have zero support for communicating with block nodes. So that is another thing for next year, getting SDKs into a way where we say, okay, we need an SDK or a part or a module. That is another thing we need to define for consensus node, for mirror node, and for block node. What we have with SDK v2 is consensus node and 5% of mirror node. And we should concentrate on consensus node 2 for v3 at the moment. And if we get at the end of Q1 a definition where we say, hey, we feel comfortable to create a prototype, a first version based on that definition, I think moving it to the TSC at the end of Q1 and saying that is what we created, please decide if we should move forward, would be a very good thing. And then using some next months to create a solid initial version in, and I think one language is not enough here because we really want to see that it works in multiple language in a good way. So maybe 2 to 3 languages, create something. It don't need to have all transaction types, because if we have a account create and account delete and only one of that is implemented, that's fine. We know that the other one will work. And maybe then have like in at the end of Q2 in Q3 something where we say, hey, now we have something that is working that we could use to interact with the network. Then we're at the point thinking about LTS support for version 2, how to do the switch and all that. That is, a general timeline I have in my head, but nothing of that is fixed. Nothing of that is, defined by the TSC or by anything else. Like that Hashcraft internally, there's a wish to do it like that. That is more like discussions Rob and I and maybe Richard have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think going from or TSC approval of the POC to actual V3 first V3 release, that could potentially take a bit just because like in addition to all the changes that we want to make for V3, I know that that's why I brought up this discussion here. I know that for each SDK, there are also different breaking changes that they want to make for their own, improvements. Which again, I don't know exactly what these issues are exactly or how long they will take. But yeah, seeing as how we're going from V2 to V3, breaking changes are allowed. It's like if we want to get this work in, that requires a breaking change, we should try and do that. Um, but yeah, as for the number, part of me would want all the SDKs to release a V3 at the same time, just so we're all on the same timeline and all the same versions. We'd always have the same 3.0, 3.1 releases. Um, but yeah, I mean that's something we'd have to figure out later, I think. I don't know plausible that would be. But yeah, so yeah, I guess kind of recap. So we're still just in the POC development phase, going through figuring out in these API guideline docs like exactly what we want V3 to look like. And again, any and all feedback is welcome. If you have an idea, just go ahead and open a PR and to talk about your change, and then we can figure it out from there.
And maybe two additional points we created in the Discord. So not in the Hedera Discord, in the LFDT Discord, a channel for the how is it called? Give me a second. So for
Okay.
exactly that, it's called Hiero SDK V3 Playground, where I already added some initial information in it. So please have a look at that channel if you're interested and would like to contribute, because I think that is a good channel to do discussions outside of this meeting. And another point, seeing the questions Sophie wrote in the meeting chat, all those should for sure be answered by the documentation we're now creating, right? So, because a lot of questions Sophie has are not that interesting for people using SDK, but very important for people contributing to SDKs. And with this V3 prototype API, which is an architectural documentation, my wish is to answer all those questions too. So even if there are things not clear in this prototyping API MD files, please ask them so that we can directly add documentation to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really great. I love what you've been creating, like MD files
Yeah,
on what's coming up and what might be the future, how it would work. I've actually had a couple of good first issues opened where people have been having a go at documenting what executable and query does. I mean, it sounds like maybe it's difficult for them, but they are
yeah,
getting. So
Mhm.
I'll take an example maybe.
yeah, and things like that would make sense. And so even the internal ones, I try to. Can you go to transactions SPI, which is one above? I think that has an example too, right? Does it has? I hope it has an example. No, I don't have an example. I need to edit. So really, that is something that you really only need to do if you implement transactions. And I want to add examples to that one too, right? So that is things that should be part of this documentation.
Yeah, that'd be really nice. I think that's what we're actually getting started on doing with the Python SDK. So I
Yeah,
have
yeah,
one issue that's waiting to be merged, which is like explaining what a query, the query class is, and like how to create
yeah.
one, and just general like how to develop for Hiero things. So I love this. This will be really
Can you
useful.
can you open that, Rob? Let's have a look because that sounds really interesting. And um,
Yeah, there have been a couple that are merged. I mean, this is an example.
I
Let me give
assume
it.
it's SDK developers, maybe.
Yeah. Uh,
No, that's
Oh,
like yeah, all this file is like our old documentation of what we created during Hacktoberfest. It's like, oh, your commits are not signed. Read this. And then I've started to create this new, maybe slightly more organized thing where, for example, I've just merged a like 7-part series, which could eventually become like 7 mini videos explaining how to do that. And then, so the idea would be like have a file for transactions, and then it's like how to create a transaction, how does executable tie into that?
mhm. I'm just looking at the PR you sent with the query. That is, I mean, that is now when looking at it, a mix between Python specific and generic information, right? So I think it's good to have that in the Python SDK for now, but a part of it should be exactly what we currently create with V3, to have that in V3 in a language independent documentation.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. Like I feel like all this is very good information that yeah isn't necessarily specific to the Python SDK. So I think a lot of this could probably live in the SDK hub. Um, yeah.
And then it's like maybe just creating examples that link to that
Yeah,
specific.
kind of. We that's a good. I think that's a thing we really should discuss. Having it now in the Python SDK is great, and it's a first step. But maybe as a next step, we can discuss how we could split it up, get a generic part into the hub, and here have the same document, which is fine, but saying, hey, you can find the general documentation here in the hub, here's a link, and here are some concrete examples how to do it in Python, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I mean, the one issue I have is I don't necessarily have experience cross SDK.
Sure.
So I wouldn't be confident at just rolling it through the rest of it. But yeah, I think that can be a long-term target to split it up.
Yep. Yep.
For sure, I
Yeah.
would need help in that because that's exactly what we need. We have so many developers are just like throwing themselves at new issues, and
Yeah.
they're doing it faster than I can review. So yeah, this kind of thing would be great.
Yeah. And I mean, I can totally understand that you say, oh, I don't have the knowledge in other SDK, so I'm not feeling comfortable to decide what is generic and what not. But doing a session with Rob and me, for example, and we factor that one and externalize parts of it, that could be a way to do it in future. But I think first of all, do it here in the Python SDK is very good, and that could be a step once something for next year then to have a look what we could extract and move into the hub, and for the samples that you have here, then trying to use this meta language that we try to use in proposals in the hub to see like, oh, this and is how it is defined. I like it. That's great.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe that's like maybe something we could maybe try and prepare for next week. Just try and do like a or maybe we could do it out of this meeting. I'm not sure what would be better, but like try and run through like quick like 15, 20 minutes, like trying to like take one of these documents and yeah, kind of um use that kind of language agnostic language that we came up with and kind of be able to just go through and see kind of what that transition would look like and be able to go through and just figure out what's Python specific, what we could leave here, but also what could we take out and make more generic.
Mhm. Yeah,
Or
all
you
makes
can even
sense to
just like
me.
open up a PR in the SDK hub and we can discuss it and go through it there too. Um,
Yeah, I'm sort of working on it concurrently to you guys. I guess we all got inspired with similar issues at the same time. Something spoke to us, which is good too.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, just again, just kind of looking through this, like this is very good info. I mean, and again, it's more so like for the developers, right? I mean, users of the SDKs don't care about the execution flow; they just care about calling dot execute and hopefully it works. But again, it's kind of just bring this full circle back to what the SDK hub was meant for, right? It's a place for more developer centric uh information. So yeah, I would really love for this to live there. I think that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, a good job on this. Like this is great. Or good job to whoever opened this PR. This is awesome.
Yeah, it looks pretty good actually. And they were able to simplify some of the examples, so it's just showing that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it can be abstracted. I've made like a plan of the training that I'm planning on creating somehow. The exact method of how I'm gonna do it is not yet established. If I could share my screen just a moment, I'll
For
show
sure.
you. So some of this is intermediate. It's not you don't necessarily want to make all of it in one go, and some of it's beginner. Once you have like the setup and everything, a lot of it is just like general architecture of what's a test, what's examples, what's a query, what's a transaction. I think that's quite generic. Protobuf training is quite generic. And then in terms of how I'm envisaging training people on how to create transactions, a lot of it is just this is the generic Hiero transaction workflow. So like for example, you create the transaction body and then you like freeze it, sign it, execute it, get the receipt, that kind of thing. And then it explains to them it comes from executable and then it comes from transaction. And then specifically inside here, it tells them like, okay, how, given all that high level overview, which is generic, how do you build generic methods for that? And then goes into like the actual worked example. So I think maybe only this bit is actually Python specific, and the rest of it is that. So that's kind of like the way I was thinking of doing it. Like, what's the high level architecture of a transaction? What's its parents? What's its grandparents? What are the generic methods? And then like just a worked example for that. And that's basically the same process that I'm doing for queries. I know queries are a little bit different, and everything else. So yeah, a lot of it is not Python SDK specific.
Yeah,
And
that's
you
fair.
have your hand up?
Angie?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm wondering for the generic information, a lot of it seems to be generic in the sense that it's just a basic understanding, like what is a transaction, what are queries, how do they work, and things like that. I'm wondering if we could break up what Sophie was demonstrating and kind of structure it in a way where it directs people to the hash graph certification course. A lot of that information in there would definitely help to especially cover some of the generic information that people just need to get a familiar understanding with before diving into anything more complex regarding the Hiero SDK. I know developers have been, especially ones that have been with us for a while, they've been looking for difficult issues, and I'm sure there could be those who just feel as though they may not have as solid of an understanding. And I think that certification definitely helps to kind of build that solid structure and then push them forward to those harder issues.
Yeah, so you're sorry, so you're saying that we should have that information be a part of those certification trainings, like all the information about the execute workflow and such.
Yeah, for example, one of the topics when we came around to discussing query, those that kind of general information is highly available in that Hashgraph certification course. And especially, it helped me, especially when I was learning and trying to understand everything. I just felt like I didn't have a solid foundation in the beginning, and I kind of wanted to go over just those basics, especially trying to get more familiar with gRPC. It really helps to build a solid foundation. So if we have anything more generic, especially when it comes to transactions, if we have anything generic when it comes to consensus, mirror node, and things like that, I think that course, not the full course, if there are certain sections of it, that's perfectly fine. We can always pull out sections, but I think directing them to specific questions, I want to say it was modules 3 and 4 that really kind of get down into the specifics of certain aspects like transactions and queries, and then later modules actually dive further into gRPC and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that would be helpful in those courses. I think maybe before we look to do that though, I think getting it into a generic language, into getting it into uh the hub for would be good. And getting yeah, just making sure it's exactly the way we want it, and it goes over everything we want to. And then once we get that established, I think from there we can maybe look to add that. I actually wouldn't even know who to talk to about that. Would you know, Hendrik? Is that like DevRel or?
So yeah, I don't know. I assume so, and I like what Angelina said. One addition from me. So I think it makes sense to create a combination, but we need to be aware that we have two different groups of developers here, right? One is a group that wants to use the SDKs and create applications on top of it. That is exactly what the Hashgraph Association course currently is made for. And what we're talking now is, and that is where the plan from Sophie fits into, is people who would like to contribute to SDKs. I believe that it do not make any sense to contribute to an SDK if you have no idea how to use it. So I believe saying, hey, before you contribute to SDKs, here's that course that shows you how to use our SDKs and how to work with them. I think that should be a very good base, and referencing to it from our material could totally make sense. I believe we should not do it the other way around, because most people who watch the Hashgraph Association course don't want to contribute to SDKs. They want to use it. And next to it, I do not want to have the things that Sophia is currently doing associated with Hashgraph Association or Hedera Foundation or Hedera, because it's about the Hiero SDKs, and my wish would here to have that hosted somewhere at Linux Foundation. Those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I have a gap in my knowledge. I need to complete that course. But yeah, I think it's correct that learning how to do the transactions, sorry, how to implement the how to how to submit a transaction will help you to understand how to create the mechanisms for the transaction.
And regarding Sophie, the topics you have now in your list, I think it makes sense to have a look about what is language independent, and we should start with that. Because that will be a help for a developer contributing to any SDK. I would even like, when looking at your list, start with this first one that includes like how to create a pull request, how to do DCO and things like that, and create really high quality videos for that, because that is interesting for every project under Hiero. Some are even interesting for every project under the Linux Foundation. And that is where, from my point of view, we should start with. And as I said, my wish is here to come together in, I don't know, February or whatever, and really do a semi-professional recording, meaning really being at a nice place where, like you can rent kind of video podcast studio where you have a good table with two microphones with a nice background and two cameras and somebody will do the recording, and you can show everything on a screen, and it will be all recorded and then cut in a meaningful way. Having that for those topics would be really great from my point of view.
Yeah. So creating good documentation, for me, I think it takes a couple of rounds, to get it just right. So, obviously right now the developers that I'm connected to are in the Python SDK. So, I think like I I think it's mostly generic, so it should mostly be in the community repo. But I have to think about how to get it there.
Totally agree. Yeah, that is nothing that is there. I think it's easy for some like DCO and all the GitHub topics because that is, even if you do everything with a Python SDK, it's already independent because you do exactly the same for each repo. But for all the rest, I totally agree. It will be more tricky, and I totally agree. You need a script, you need an idea about what to talk, so it's not boom and it's done. Yeah, but I think we need to start with something, and yeah.
Okay, makes sense. I can do that.
Yeah, we'll definitely be able to help out with that too. Just maybe the first one or two markdowns you try and bring over, we'll make sure that the API guidelines are followed and everything looks good. And then like after that it should be you can kind of get an idea of how it looks like and what info we're looking for, and it should be pretty smooth sailing from there, I would think.
How does the copyright work when you do port documentations between repos? I assume that's fine.
I would assume so too. I don't know for sure. But uh yeah, I think it would be fine. Okay, well, we got 2 minutes left. Did have a few other topics, but I think those will not be able to be covered in 1 minute. So, mm, guess maybe we'll just save all of the other topics for next Monday. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Um, okay. Yeah, we can go ahead. Well, actually, so if you mentioned you had a few questions. Did you want to push those next meeting, or were those questions already answered?
Yeah, it's something to maybe continue discussing. I don't have another meeting right now. If anyone's available to talk through a couple of things, that would be great. Otherwise, you can wait.
Yeah, I still have a little bit of time.
Okay. Maybe I can contact you on Discord because I recognize you have issues that you wanted to discuss first, which were on the agenda. So I'll ping you with some of the questions maybe.
Okay, that sounds good. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you hopefully in the good first issue call tomorrow, or if not, then the next meeting next Monday. See ya.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
bye.